They told us we were drilling through ice. They didn't tell us the ice was listening. I only realized it the first night our thermal drills screamed. It wasn't mechanical. It was the kind of scream that turns your blood to a slow river, pressure singing in bone, harmonics flexing behind your eyes, like the glacier itself was taking a breath and deciding whether to keep us. If I sound superstitious, forgive me. 30 years writing about science will sand your metaphors down to numbers, but this isn't a paper. This is a confession, and confessions don't survive on numbers alone. You know me, at least you think you do, from the clean voiceovers, the tidy diagrams, the credibility that comes from surviving a few missions and a dozen failures. Before Antarctica, I did precision metrology at JPL, a handful of quantum-limited sensors for deep space interferometry, and one ugly consult at Area 51 that I never put on paper. They called me because I understood the kind of silence instruments need to hear truth. That's all we wanted down here. Silence, and a core of ice older than our language. It was late 2024 when I flew in over the Ross Ice Shelf, the C-17 rattling like a ribcage full of coins. McMurdo lay under a lid of gray sky. We spent 4 days knocking ice out of shipping containers and swearing at inventory lists that thought copper washers were the same as stainless. The mission patch said Vostok Axis, a joke that stopped being one after the third briefing. On maps, we were East Antarctic Plateau Subglacial Access. In the hallways, we were the other name, the Atlas team, because the Atlas Early Warning Network in Hawaii had flagged something weird, a flicker in a stream that should only talk about asteroids. That was the first stitch between rocks in the sky and ice in the dark. The second stitch came from the James Webb Telescope discovery logs, baseline spectra showing a series of transient absorption lines from a lensed galaxy at Z12 that reappeared with a rhythm nothing stellar should have. Someone on our side noticed the same cadence whistling through IceCube's neutrino array. 3 sites, 1 pattern. It felt like the start of a joke only the universe was allowed to tell. If you want dates, we set the first drill on December 9th, 2024. The air was so clear the stars felt almost near enough to grab. In my bunk, I kept a spiral notebook like the old days. I wrote down temperatures, drift, the way engines sounded through snow. I wrote 2 lines I didn't show anyone. The ice has a memory, and the memory has a grid. On December 12th, our vibrometer picked up a standing wave pattern in the borehole at exactly 2.731 kilohertz. We tested every culprit, bearing resonance, cable harmonics, even the stupid theory that one of us was humming unconsciously. Nothing. The tone came from the ice itself, and it wasn't random. It modulated. A slow, careful breath. We established Camp Axis 600 kilometers from Vostok Station, over a subglacial lake no one had named, because no one had confirmed it yet. The radar returns looked wrong. Beneath 3.5 kilometers of ice, the bedrock formed a basin with edges too straight for geology and a floor that rang like a bell when the ice sheet moved with the tides. Not metaphorically. We heard it ring. This is where I should say we used the word portal. We didn't. Not then. We used phase interface. We were careful with language because careful language lets you keep your job. The press kit sentence would have been, "We discovered a mesoscopic lattice embedded within the ice that exhibited anomalous phononic behavior consistent with a tunable phase transition." What I whispered to myself when the others slept was different. There's a door and it opens when you sing to it. I said we drilled and the ice screamed. That first scream came when we crossed 2,800 meters and the RPM dropped with no corresponding torque increase. The thermal head was kissing something that pulled heat sideways like a river you couldn't see. I watched the real-time refractometer on the meltwater stream swing through values you only get in lab crystals, not snow that fell before Hannibal crossed the Alps. The stream went glassy, then iridescent, and then a dull, impossible black. The only way I can describe it is color that swallowed light in a way physics permits only in equations. We paused. Procedure says pause. We vented the head, let the temperature climb. The blackness receded like the shadow of a fish disappearing from under ice. We resumed. At 3,112 meters, the accelerometers picked up a cross-axis vibration at 7 times the rotational rate. One of the riggers muttered about ghosts in the rails. I kept my mouth shut and listened to the ghost. I wish I could make you feel the quiet down there. Snow eats sound, but ice shapes it. A clap travels forever. A whispered curse comes back as a judgment. We'd step out to pee and look up, and there'd be the Milky Way pouring itself from horizon to horizon like a memory of the river we left behind to come here. The air burned your lungs and you held it anyway, because it tasted like the beginning of the world. Every night I thought, we're trespassing. By December 17th, the hole was glass. The down-bore cameras started sending images no technician wants to see. Pristine walls with a hexagonal shimmer like frost on a cathedral window, except the hexagons weren't surface. They were volume. Imagine cutting through a field of snowflakes frozen mid-fall, every crystal perfectly aligned to a geometry bigger than your intuition. The lattice rotated as we descended, as if it were choosing an orientation for us that we didn't merit. We deployed the acoustic source. It was a piezoelectric stack I'd tuned for years, built to whisper and shout into rock. We sent a sweep from 500 Hz to 10 kHz and watched the returns like cardiologists of a frozen heart. At 2.731 kHz, the world changed. The hole stopped behaving like a cylinder of water. It behaved like a cavity in a crystal. The echo return doubled, then tripled, and then a second tone appeared like a harmony you didn't know you were capable of singing. That second tone corresponded to nothing we had fed. It dragged us half a hertz down and a quarter up in a pattern Ice Cube had been hearing for months. I wrote the pattern on my glove and pressed my fist against my lips as if I could force myself to forget it. My hand shook. I remember the taste of neoprene dull and chemical on my tongue. I remember thinking of the JWST notes about the lensed galaxy stuttering light. I remember thinking, this is not local. We opened the phase interface on the 19th because we were arrogant and because we were scared. That's a human combination that has built cities and burned them. The procedure was simple in the way a key is simple. Hold frequency, increase amplitude until you see the refractive index plunge, keep the heat gradient shallow, and do not, this is the part we all said out loud to each other, do not lock the phase if the return harmonics drop below threshold. If they drop, you back out. You let it sleep. You try again another day. We rehearsed it like a prayer. I led the run. I asked them for quiet. The generator hummed like a patient animal. We touched 2.731 kHz, and the ice stopped being ice. The dark returned, not a color, not a texture, but a kind of surrender. The borehole didn't widen, but the space inside it changed. Our fiber scope pierced the surface like a moth entering a chapel. The image it sent was illegal to dream about. No water, no silt, no rock. It looked like atmosphere with weight. Particulate glitter in slow convective waves, each flake turning like a thought deciding itself. Blue at the edges where our light hit, and red toward the center where our light didn't. The camera tried to find depth and failed. It focused to infinity and got a whisper. My assistant, Farah, squeezed my shoulder hard enough to leave a bruise. "It's a medium," she said very quietly. "It's not a void." We had names ready. Supercooled clathrate, exotic ice, quasi-crystalline inclusion. It wasn't any of them. It behaved like a field with memory. We dipped the thermal head 2 centimeters into that not water, and the temperature didn't change. Heat vanished. No was accepted, in a fashion that made our equations look like children's prayers. The return tone steadied. The lattice rotated once more, a deliberate tick, lining hexagon on hexagon in a way my mind remembers with nausea and awe. The men in Nevada had told me what to expect when a wave function goes from spread to sharp, from maybe to yes. It felt like that. It felt like the moment in an Area 51 lab when a pair of entangled photons shrugged off the miles and behaved like one. The ice became agreement. You want to know what we sent through. I'll tell you everything I can bear. First, a sensor pellet the size of a bead, wired to a spool. It drifted as if in slow wind. Magnetic field, fluctuating at submilligauss levels in a rhythm out of sync with our generators. Temperature, undefined. Undefined is a coward's word. The probe reported noise consistent with thermal equilibrium, and yet nothing warmed, nothing cooled, and every electron on the board seemed reluctant to admit motion. We reeled it back, and the solder joints looked tired, as if it had aged. We weighed it. The pellet returned heavier by 26 micrograms. We tested the scale twice. 3 times. Farah quietly said, "We're paying a toll." Then we sent sound. A short pattern taken from the JWST transient, downshifted into the audible band, a courtesy knock. The medium absorbed it and replied in kind, not an echo but an answer offset by a pattern you'd call syntax if you were drunk or arrogant. I was both. I answered, improvising with tremors in my hands, and something, matched me. I didn't tell the team I cried then, behind the monitor, the way a person cries when they meet a childhood friend in the shape of an adult they didn't recognize. I didn't tell them because I didn't have a name for what was speaking back through the Antarctic ice, and because naming is the first step toward lying. By midnight on the 20th, we had a decision to make. 2 members wanted to pause and raise the borehole head. 1 wanted to contact McMurdo and wait. The satellite link was a coin flip at that latitude, and the weather was leaning toward a no. The Atlas team in Hawaii had sent a short, frantic message before we lost the window. An inbound object tagged Atlas 6066 had changed its albedo in a way rocks don't, then winked out of the visual band entirely while still occluding background starlight. A stealth asteroid, or a packed field-changing phase in sunlight, or a lie told by space to keep us busy while something else happened under our boots. The subject line read, "Atlas Impact Corridor Update, Antarctica." I stared at it until the generator hiccuped. I felt small in a way no cathedral can make you feel small. We went deeper. The capsule was a repurposed cryo-sampler, a stainless bullet with a clear sapphire nose and a coil of fiber the length of a city. We lowered it into the medium at 0217. The tone held. The harmonics braided themselves into a pattern that made everyone go quiet, in the same way a flock of birds goes quiet when a hawk draws a line across the sky. The capsule drifted. It met no resistance, and every resistance. Its inertial sensors reported motion in vectors that didn't exist in our geometry. Farah whispered, "It's turning in 6. I nodded foolishly like a parishioner who had finally seen the statue move. At 0223, the feed went black, not dead. Black as if our light had been accepted and turned face down. The fiber went slack, then taut, like a fish tugging in a river. The borehole camera showed nothing but that impossible red-blue shimmer. I remember gripping the winch control with a stupid white-knuckle fury because physical force seemed like the only language left to me. I remember the smell inside my mask. I remember my name sounding wrong in the mouths of my friends. The capsule came back. I have told myself not to remember what it brought. I have failed. The sapphire nose had crazed, fine feathers like frost, but inside the crystal. Embedded in those feathers were shapes like snowflakes that forgot how to be symmetrical. They were almost letters, almost machines, almost cells. When the lab lights hit them, the room dimmed. Not physically, but in me, as if my visual cortex had to budget itself to parse them. Something had climbed into the substrate and left a grammar there. The coil was heavier. We weighed it. The coil was older. We radiocarbon dated a bit of insulating polymer as a joke. It came back with a skew that implied it had spent time where cosmic rays were different. The magnetometer sulked and refused to play. The Geiger counter laughed at us quietly and then went to 0. There was a smell where the capsule had been. It wasn't chemical. It was a word I didn't know at the time and have since invented for myself, of before. Like the first rainfall that ever fell on basalt, like petrichor from a world that hadn't decided on plants yet. We thought we had opened a window into some subglacial brine trapped since Gondwana. We were wrong. We had opened a portal, not a hole in space to elsewhere, but a phase door in time's habit, a place where the universe stored its drafts. The mesoscopic lattice threaded the ice because the ice kept it, kept singing to it through weight and winter, kept the memory like bone keeps a break. You're hearing me drift toward poetry because physics won't let me stand. At 03:11, the tone changed. The harmony we'd been dancing with flattened into something like a warning. The lattice locked orientation, hexagon over hexagon, until even the anti-aliasing on our displays cried uncle. Farah swore softly in Arabic. The generator groaned as if something were sipping from it down the borehole. Not a surge, not a short, but a tithe. The air pressure in the tent shifted by a pascal we hadn't earned. I knew that feeling. I had felt it at Groom Lake when we squeezed noise out of a vacuum chamber until the vacuum squeezed back. I should have stopped then. I should have raised the head and poured glycol and let it freeze and told the report a gentler lie. Instead, I nodded at the winch. The medium took the capsule again, but this time it did not drift. It went with purpose in a direction our math doesn't have. The harmonic structure simplified, as if our orchestra had been told to hush so the soloist could speak. When the feed returned, the camera didn't show red-blue whirl. It showed a surface, not a wall. Walls end, and this did not end, but a boundary that looked like wet light. On the far side of it moved silhouettes that made no simple sense. They were not creatures. They were behaviors. You would have called them hands, only because you are a coward in the face of taxonomy. They arranged themselves into shapes, and those shapes assembled into diagrams, and those diagrams, God forgive me, looked like plans. We were not the first to open the door. We were not the first to send our curiosity through, nor the first to demand return. The medium remembered others. Sometimes I think of the area under Dome C where French and Italian teams once pulled cores that sang a little when the wind was right. Sometimes I think of the old stories of Admiral Byrd and his hollow earth nonsense, and I wonder what tone he heard over the roar of his engines. Sometimes I think of the fossilized microbes the Russians insisted weren't contaminants. Sometimes I think none of us invented anything. We rediscovered a verb and spoke it in the wrong tense. The silhouettes on the other side of the wet light rearranged. A new pattern grew. It was familiar in an aching way that made my stomach knot. I recognized it because I had seen it above the ice, in vacuum. James Webb Telescope discovery logs flagging the lensed galaxy that blinked in a human tempo. The pattern wasn't just a nod from far away. It was the same grammar, the same breath. The door under us and the light over us were phases of a single thing. Space talking to its own memory. Farah gripped my sleeve. "It's an address," she said. "It's telling us where to stand." I didn't want to stand there. I wanted to go home and let someone else pronounce this terrible syllable. But we had aligned too much. We had tuned ourselves to a truth that was tired of being ignored. We sent the last thing we had, my voice. Not the sweep, not the chord, not the safe instrument talk. Just my voice, stripped and shaking. I said my name. I said why we had come. I said we understood nothing, and that we would accept a lesson at any cost we could pay. There was a quiet after that sentence in which the universe counted my foolishness. Then the medium answered with a sound I have not described to anyone else. I am describing it to you because you are the last friend I have who will still listen. It said my name back, not as a mirror, not as a recording, but as a recognition. It said it with my mother's intonation from the first time I lied about breaking a window. It said it with my first-grade teacher's patience. It said it with the note in the voice of the only person I have ever loved when she told me I would die here if I kept living like this. It said it with the authority of tidal force and the mercy of snowfall. It said, "You are late." The capsule spasmed. The coil jerked. The winch sang like a harp. The borehole camera washed with dark. When we pulled the capsule back, the sapphire had not only crazed, it had reconfigured. The almost letters had aligned into something a child could trace with a greasy finger. The plan we had glimpsed on the far side of the light wasn't a plan for a machine in our sense. It was a plan for a behavior, a way to make matter remember how to open. It was a key we did not deserve. You're waiting for the thing with teeth, I know. The horror with claws. The base hasn't been haunted by a beast. Antarctica does not need monsters. It has scale. What came through the door wasn't a creature. It was a context. Pressure rose by 3 pascals and stayed there. The generator burped and thereafter drank diesel like a camel. We siphoned fuel from 2 tractors to keep it smiling. The compass needles were fine until they weren't, and then they pointed together toward nothing like flowers turning to a sun in a room without windows. We walked differently. We thought a little faster and a little slower, like our minds had learned a second language overnight and were ashamed to try it. The stars above us blinked in a rhythm that no one else on Earth saw, because no one else had tuned their floor the way we had tuned ours. The next day, when the satellite window opened, McMurdo tried to raise us. The link died 3 times in the first minute like a heart with new arrhythmias. The message that finally made it through was short. Atlas had updated the impact corridor. The object that had winked out of the visual band was not coming. It had already passed. It had passed through a slice of sky that Webb had been watching and left there a signature no one had language for. Someone typed, "Asteroid Atlas Impact Anomaly" into a subject line and then wrote, "Antarctica Secret Base." As a joke, that was not a joke. We closed the door. We told ourselves we did. We let the tone slip and the lattice relax, and we watched the refractive index climb back to values you could teach in a sophomore class. We poured glycol. We let it freeze. We rolled up the coil and boxed the capsule and stacked the boxes and labeled them with names that would not betray them to anyone who didn't already know their sin. We very carefully, very soberly, did not talk about what we had seen. And yet the door didn't close. The phase remained like a bruise under the skin of the camp. The air felt charged in the mornings like the moment before your lover's name. The snow drifted differently along the tents, piling where it had never piled, avoiding places it used to favor. Farah dreamed every night the same dream of hexagons the size of continents sliding gracefully into place. I dreamed I was under an ocean with the light from above coming not from a sun, but from a lens that remembered something older than suns. The base medic, a good man named Decker, came to me on the 23rd and said he would appreciate it if we stopped whatever we were doing because his patients had begun to hallucinate in the quiet minutes between midnight and dawn. I told him we had stopped. He believed me until he went outside and saw the faint auroral glow pulsing from the hole. We argued beside that soft glow like sinners beside a vigil candle. He broke first and asked the question I'd been avoiding. "What did you open, Doc?" I said. "Not a where." He said, "Then a who?" I said, "Not a who." He spat into his beard and laughed, and it wasn't a happy sound. "Then we're not qualified," he said, and walked away. On Christmas Eve, we gave up pretending. We held frequency again. Because we were addicts or because we were responsible, I still don't know. The door accepted us more quickly, like someone who had decided we would outlast their patience anyway. The medium on the far side was brighter. The silhouettes were closer to comprehensible, the behaviors closer to forms you could draw without cheating. They showed us something I will carry in my pocket until I die. A field of ice under a sky we do not have, folded into plates that moved like lungs. In the ice were cities, no walls, no roofs, just arrangements of field lines where a thing with senses like ours could stand and be taught. And standing there off to one side like a patient teacher was a shape in the outline of a human, because that was how we needed to see it. I knew even then that the shape was a mercy. Whatever made the door wore us like a mask, only for as long as necessary. I spoke. I don't remember what I said. The recording does. The shape replied without sound. The coil registered its breath. The capsule registered its patience. The plan in the sapphire nose sharpened by 1 degree and then drifted by 2, as if to say, "You will never own this, but you can borrow it if you stop asking the wrong questions." The wrong question was what? The right question was when. I'm going to tell you something that will make you hate me for not saying it sooner. We were not first. We were not second. The door has been there longer than the ice. The continent found it and learned to sing with it, because that is what continents do when they have time. The ruins we whisper about in Antarctica, the ones we assign to Nazis and Atlanteans and every exotic sin we can invent, those are just what happens when humans keep standing near the door until the door's patience rubs off. The ancient ruins in Antarctica are neither ancient nor ruins. They are failed attempts at memory storage by impatient apes. The door tolerated a few, adopted none, and waited for the ice to grow back and keep secrets. I can hear you thinking about the Area 51 experiment, about quantum channels and spooky action at a distance, about how we might have primed ourselves for this by lacing our instruments with entanglement. You're not wrong. The only experiment I'm still proud of is the one where we sent nothing through and something came out changed anyway. We left the coil in the tent, turned off the generators, shut our mouths, and waited. The lattice under us oriented once, gently, respectfully, and the compass needles hopped. When you walk with a place long enough, it teaches you its name. Antarctica is a place that remembers. Quantum theory has always been a story about memory told by people too formal to admit it. On the last day of the year, the Atlas team confirmed what my bones already knew. Atlas 6266 was not an asteroid. It was absence shaped by intention, moving through sunlight like a monk through a market, taking nothing, leaving quiet. It crossed a corridor of sky, touched a place where Webb's lensed galaxy flickered, and then the blinked rhythm stopped. Not failed, completed, like a sentence falling clean on its period. You will find the paper in a year or two, couched in language about transient occluding events and non-gravitational trajectories. It will be sterile. It will be kind. It will be a lie that loves us. We closed camp in January because storms came and because budgets die and because the people who write the checks had begun to ask the kinds of questions that end with hearings. We filled the hole as best we could. We packed the capsule in a crate that said, "Geochemical, delay OK." We left the generator and its tired hunger for fuel to men with wrenches. We left lines in the snow that the wind erased like a bored god. As the C-17 lifted, I looked down and saw the faintest blush of light where our borehole had been, pulsing once like a heart that had decided on life. I have not slept well since. I hear the tones sometimes in the thin places of the night where the refrigerator hum lines up with the blood in my ears. I see hexagons in frost on my windshield, and they almost line up before they don't. I follow the James Webb Telescope Discovery News like a widower follows weather. I watch for Atlas posts and asteroid impact corridor updates like a man waiting for a call from someone who already left. I go walking at strange hours and step deliberately on manhole covers and grates, because the way sound moves up through them reminds me of standing over the borehole with a coil of fiber in my hands and thinking, we are children playing clinic with a real God. You wanted the horror. Here is the only horror that matters. We did not find a portal to another world. We found a way to ask our world to show us its first draft. It obliged. The draft is not kind, it is honest. It remembers what it was before anything hardened into the convenience we call matter. That memory is a solvent. It will loosen your grip on every noun you love. It will unclench your hand from your name. It will tell you you are late, and that late is still on time if you agree to speak less and listen more. If I am telling you this, it is not because I want you to be careful. Careful is a word for surfaces. I am telling you because you will hear the tone one night when your city is asleep and your phone coughs a notification you didn't ask for, and a headline whispers, Antarctica secret base, and Area 51 experiment, and James Webb anomaly like gossip from a party you weren't invited to, and you will think of me and understand that parties were never the point. You will stand by your window and feel the glass remember the sand it was, and you will have a choice. We made ours. We opened the door. We learned that doors once found never really close. They just wait to be pronounced again. I will sleep now if sleep will have me. If you wake in the night and hear something under the refrigerator hum, don't be afraid. Or rather, be the kind of afraid that keeps your hands steady. Breathe like the ice breathes. Listen for the lattice turning. And if the universe says your name back to you in a voice that sounds like everyone who ever loved you, don't ask what comes through. Ask when you are ready to go stand where it asks. The truth behind the universe is not a shout. It is a tone held so long you mistake it for silence, until the day you finally hear it saying, very softly, that you have always been part of the word that opens.